Hello, everyone, and welcome back to K-Says Talks. This time we are taking our last topic a step ahead. Last time we had a conversation with Surya around Russia-Ukraine crisis, but it's almost been 2.5 weeks since we talked about that issue, and there have been multiple sort of escalations since the time we spoke about. So before going to the next topic that we promised in the last podcast, which was around China, Taiwan, we are taking the last podcast with an update, and then in the next podcast we will take a different issue. So first of all, welcome Surya, and I hope you are keeping good in this times.
Thanks, Sandesh. Yeah, I mean, it's a little difficult, but so far we've avoided the worst of it.
Yeah,
So I hope you are well as well.
yeah, I am also doing well. So Surya, let's move ahead, I guess. I think the first question, very straightforward, that I'd like to ask to you is that what has happened since those 2.5 weeks that we spoke about the issue? Are there any escalations that we are seeing, or how has the issue turned out to be as we stand today?
So yeah, since then, I personally expected the issue to die down with talks, get and not escalate further, but I was wrong. It has escalated. So what is happening right now is it's not that communication has broken down, but it's the fact that Russia has reiterated very impossible demands to the US and the West, which, if you have seen, included things like you can't add any more European countries to NATO, and those are claims that simply cannot be accepted, right? Because that is a straight no, and that's not how negotiations work. Which obviously leaves the question: why is Putin making such demands that he himself knows will not be accepted, right? So along with that, Russian troops have moved in to closer and closer to more Russian troops have moved in closer to the Ukrainian border, and the West has at least some countries in the West have begun to supply some form of aid to Ukraine with excuse me, with the UK, for example, supplying anti-tank missiles and weapons to Ukraine. This might not mean much
Hmm.
actually, because the Russian military is very, very strong and very large.
Hmm.
But the fact is, the West is finding some sort of response to Russian aggression now, or perceive what they perceive as Russian aggression now. So it will be, as I said, it's going to evolve. It is not going now. It is very clear that both sides are at a situation or at a place where neither wants to back down.
Hmm.
So right now it is very precarious. But the good thing is, just day before yesterday, the US Secretary of State and the Russian Foreign Minister met in Geneva. That's where people usually meet when they want to discuss peace, right? So they met there and they decided that, we're going to keep the dialogue open. We are not going to just shut off dialogue, and we don't want to be another Cold War type situation. So the communication there is what I believe will alone is what I believe will diffuse the situation, even if possible. So, but as of now, things are looking much worse than what they were when we last spoke.
Understood.
So, yeah,
So,
that's where we are.
Surya, just a quick follow-up to what you said about British, anti-tank missiles reaching Ukraine as a supportive measure. Do you think these are mere tokenistic moves that the West is trying to have in order to, please Ukraine to sort of come back on their side, or is it going to make an impact? Because as you put it down correctly, right, that the Russian troops are so humongous that these sort of supports just by sending a few anti-tank missiles and is not going to make any mark as such. So is this a mere tokenistic move?
From what it seems, the number of missiles the UK has sent, it does seem like a token move, because that is in no way enough to deter the Russian tank forces. Now, just to put some perspective, I believe the UK has sent some 2,000 anti-tank weapons,
Hmm, hmm.
and the Russians can field anywhere between 10 and 12,000 tanks right now. So this is, of course, this accounting for all the tanks that are in repair and that have been decommissioned.
Hmm,
10 to 12,000 tanks is a lot. It's a humongous tank force.
hmm,
So at this moment, that is the only move that has come out of the West in terms of actually arming Ukraine.
hmm,
In fact, one of the people who actually armed Ukraine, gave them deadly weaponry, was Trump. He, of course, this was back when he was president. He did give Ukraine a lot of weapons, and he discussed, giving more and more weapons as well, of course. But he was removed from office. He lost the election.
Hmm.
So now it seems that the new US president is trying to take a different approach at that. But I mean, again, as it remains to be seen how it's going to work out. But
Hmm.
as of now, the response of the West is purely tokenism. There's no real concrete response from the West as of now.
Fair enough. Understood. So I think speaking from our last video, one of the very important things that we sort of missed out was the economic angle of this crisis, right? I mean, what are the dependence that today even Russia has on European Union and the other way around. So we see a lot of trade deals happening in between both of them because both of them need supports from each other in terms of, let's say, Europe looking support in terms of gas from Russia, or Russia looking for necessary items from Europe. So in times when the issue is escalating so much, let's see if there is a trade halt that comes between both the parties. How and what are the damages that we are going to see on both the sides?
So that is, yeah, that actually something we should have spoken about last time. But that itself, it's a big topic. But no, you're right. Both Russia and Europe are historically dependent on each other, even though they have been enemies for a long time. They
Hmm.
have been dependent on each other for
Hmm.
various things. Now, Russia, as you know, is not exactly an agricultural haven, right? Although agricultural produce has increased, a lot of Russia's food, excuse me, a lot of Russia's food and other items of necessity come from Europe,
Hmm.
and consequently Russia supplies about 40% of the gas that Europe consumes.
Hmm.
Now, especially now that it's January, so it's peak winter, so
Hmm.
any escalation could even mean shutting off of gas supply,
Hmm.
which means Europe will freeze.
Hmm.
No heating in the homes, no running of, basically their economy can come to a crippling halt. Now,
Hmm.
when it comes to food and those kind of things, Russia has opportunities to import it from, say, China or other countries like which don't really care about American sanctions.
Hmm.
So I would say that yes, it would affect Russia's economy in the future
Hmm.
if this whole thing were to happen. Because if you recall the Crimean invasion in 2014, when
Hmm.
Putin just walked in and took over Crimea,
Yes. Hmm.
the West heavily sanctioned Russia, and that is something that their economy has not been able to recover from. So
Exactly. Hmm.
additional sanctions would make it even worse.
Hmm.
And at a time when the world economies are trying to recover from the pandemic, additional crippling sanctions from the West, which could even go so far as shutting Russia out of the international banking system, the SWIFT network.
Hmm.
That is something that could be proposed. That is what has happened with the North Korea and what happened with Iran.
Hmm.
But they could even do that to Russia, which would cripple their economy even more. Can you imagine in a time like this being shut out of the international banking system?
Indeed.
Now,
Hmm.
as far as Russia is concerned, there's something that people kind of underestimate, but it's something to be concerned about, is that Russia could shut off its airspace to European airlines. Now, in the Cold War, just to be very briefly, I will explain this. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union had shut off its airspace to every Western airline. Okay, and because of which any flight from, say, London to Tokyo or London to Beijing or London to Hanoi, the East Asian countries, was very expensive and very long. In fact, at one point, the British Airways operated a flight that took a week to reach Tokyo from London. It had multiple stops. It had to stop in Rome. It had to stop in Karachi, in Calcutta, and then of course the longer jets that came, they kind of bypassed Siberia, I mean Russia, and then they went to Alaska, and then they had to come back down again. So that was very expensive. And now, of course, after the Cold War, Russia opened up its airspace, and they charge exorbitant amount of fees from each airline passing over its airspace. So they have used airspace as a geopolitical tool in the past, and they could very well do it again. They could tell Lufthansa and British Airways that, okay, look, you are being hostile to us in terms of this, so we are not going to allow our airspace to you. So that will become very difficult for airlines to operate.
Hmm.
And airlines also, as you know, are trying to recover from the horrible losses of the last 2 years. So
Hmm.
uh, it is a battle, a fight to the bottom, where both sides will annihilate each other economically if they go down this road. So yeah, that is what will happen, and it would be economic catastrophe if they were to go through with that.
Understood. So in such a situation, as you were putting it down correctly, right, that Russia still has, let's say, means to get its food supplies or immediate needs from other countries like China, or even that matter for India. In such a situation where, let's say, if Russia is to approach India for primary necessary supplies, where do you see once again the American and Indian relations? Because in that situation, we are then favoring a lot towards Russia in that sense.
So what will happen actually is, now I will just take North Korea as an example. The North Korea is banned from pretty much every, trading, every aspect of the global economy. North Korea is banned from, right, and they've been sanctioned. But the UN and the US and these powers, right, and other Western powers have made concessions in terms of essential supplies that include food and medicine and things like that. But what will happen is, even regular business deals between India and Russia, now not military, I'm talking about, say Reliance wants to do business in Russia, or some Indian company wants to do business in Russia, or vice versa. That also will become very, very difficult, because right now the US does not want to antagonize India by sanctioning Indian companies, which is why, we are expecting the CATSA waiver, as we spoke about CATSA last time. It is almost a foregone conclusion that we will get a waiver. But any war like situation in Ukraine, and suddenly the US would be much more committed to stopping Russia from getting its bread and butter. So if that has to mean that they have to sanction Indian companies from doing business with them, I personally think that they would, be okay with it. They would bite the bullet. Like, as an example, India used to be one of the largest importers of oil from Iran, and currently we don't import any oil,
Yes, exactly.
because of the pressure that Trump put on India.
Yeah.
So, and that is with a country that they are currently not fighting in a war. Now, if Russia and the West were to get into conflict, then America would be even more committed and even more hell bent on trying to destroy the Russian economy. And if they have to sanction Indian companies, as I said, I don't think they would even bat an eyelid. They would do it. So we need to be a little more careful in this situation now.
Fair enough. So that gives a proper paint of understanding around the economic picture. So one of the other things that happened in this last 2.5 weeks since we last spoke was the Kazakhstan crisis, right? The fuel prices soar humongously there, because of which we saw people coming on streets and also leading to a lot of trouble inside that country. So, with that context in mind, do you think there are going to be any spillover impacts in the Russian and Ukraine crisis as such, or is there any links that you see, because it's nearby where we stand today?
Yes. Short answer, yes. There is definitely a link. Now, I'm not going to go into Kazakhstan crisis in detail, because that would require its own video. But very, very briefly, as you rightly said, the trigger for the protest was high fuel and even food prices, right? Inflation, basically.
Yes, exactly.
But depending on the source you read, the one source says that this is purely because of the fact that they are tired of living under an authoritarian ruler who doesn't care about his own people, and the other side says that this is a color revolution that the US and the West is trying to bring about within these countries and try and move them away from Russian influence. Now, of course, whichever side you believe in, you can believe in. That's not a problem. But the fact is, the country of Kazakhstan is part of an organization called the CSTO. Okay. Now the CSTO, excuse me, just a second, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, right? So this CSTO, very briefly, is something like a NATO, where there are about 6 countries right now, all former Soviet states. Armenia, Kazakhstan is one of them, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, and a couple of others.
Azerbaijan as well, I believe, right?
Yes, no, not Azerbaijan, Armenia. So yes. So what's going to happen is that if any country invades, say, Kazakhstan, they won't, but if some country invades Kazakhstan,
Hmm.
it would be like invading Russia, just like how NATO is, right? An
Hmm.
attack against one is an attack against all. So these uh, the CSTO, excuse me,
Hmm.
was expanded into supporting each other in promoting law and order in the region in these
Hmm.
countries,
Hmm.
and which basically means that if there is a law and order problem in Kazakhstan that the central government is not able to handle,
Hmm.
they can ask for help from the other CSTO members. Now, this is exactly what happened in Kazakhstan.
Hmm.
That the protests got little too violent for just inflation, is what the Kazakhstani authorities believed, and they asked for Russian troops.
Hmm.
Now, Russia immediately sent troops. Right, all they were doing was waiting for the go ahead from the Kazakh president, and the troops came in and they crushed the revolution, like violently crushed the revolution, and the
Hmm.
Russian troops withdrew.
Hmm.
So Kazakhstan has its importance for Russia, to Russia in in many ways. For example, all the space launches happen from the Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan because Russia does not have its own space launching thing. It was always there,
Hmm.
and Kazakhstan is a resource-rich country, especially uranium, and that is what Russia needs for its civilian and military nuclear programs.
Yes. Hmm.
So what we have seen is that Russia is willing to use force and
Hmm.
disproportionate force to protect its interests in
Hmm.
Kazakhstan.
Hmm.
Now, the West, if they're going to try and calculate Russia's response to, the whatever they're trying to do with NATO, they should know that Russia is now willing and capable of using force to, protect its interests in Ukraine. Now, that means that the West should not just write off Putin saber rattling, saying he will not actually enter into a conflict with the West, because as we have seen, he is willing to do that. So
Hmm.
that will be another additional point that the West and NATO in general are going to keep in mind while
Hmm.
negotiating with Russia on diffusing the Ukraine crisis. So and consequently, the Russian security planners would be looking at the chaos that happened in Afghanistan a few months ago,
Hmm.
when the US pulled out, and not just pulled out, but the manner in which they pulled out,
Yes.
it was so chaotic.
Hmm. Hmm.
It, if I were a Russian military planner, it would seem to me that the US government cannot convince its people to go to war.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Hmm.
And yes, while I agree with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, it's just the way it was done. As you saw, the horrible images
Hmm. Hmm.
of people clinging onto airplanes, the Russians would probably look at it and say, okay, these guys are a little divided and confused,
Hmm.
and they don't seem to have the stomach for a fight. Now, they could very well be wrong, but this is what they're going to look at.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, so as far as Kazakhstan is concerned, I think the West would be a little more wary now,
Hmm.
given that Putin would be willing to use force to protect his interests.
Understood. Understood. Fair enough. So let's move to the last part of this last question of this today's discussion. It is basically around what happened once again in the past, around 1962. Let's say when Russia-American crisis was around its peak, and we saw that China during that time invaded India, primarily because of the reason that, let's say, when the international focus is on somewhere else, there are situations that one can create to take benefit out of that, right? And in today's context, that is near China and Taiwan. So what do you see happening around this time as we move ahead, and what's the situation as of now?
So yes, you are right. 1962 at that time was the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So obviously, those two superpowers at the time were engaged in elsewhere, and their attention was elsewhere. And that's when China decided to launch a sneak attack on India in eastern Ladakh and in Arunachal. So now, if I'm looking at the situation, it is going to be a lot more difficult for them to do that here, because at that time, even invading a country that was not ready for war, we basically did not have troops at all, close to the frontier,
Yes.
and even invading that was difficult for China, because Himalayas are a very formidable structure to geographical feature to get past.
Hmm.
Now, India is a fully combat committed country. We
Hmm.
have anywhere between 200 and 300,000 troops
Hmm.
in along the border with China,
Hmm.
in all sectors from Arunachal right up to Ladakh,
Hmm.
and of course air assets and missiles and whatnot.
Hmm.
So invading now would be way more difficult than back it would what it would have been then.
Hmm.
But one thing that China would look at is Taiwan, because that is their principal focus. Their entire legitimacy of the Communist Party, it seems, they have staked it on the reunification of Taiwan.
Hmm.
So to actually invade it, you need to get across the sea. It's
Hmm.
about a 60-mile stretch, about 70-80 kilometer stretch. But there are only two short windows where
Hmm.
that invasion can actually happen.
Hmm.
It's one is in April and one is in October.
Hmm.
The Because that's when the seas are calm. Because otherwise the sea is very rough, and a cross-strait invasion will be very difficult. Even in calm waters is difficult, but even when the waters are not calm, it's almost impossible. So if this crisis continues, spills over into March, April, it could very well be the opportunity that China is looking for to try some of the nefarious designs on Taiwan. Because China is not going to do anything now, given that the Olympics are coming up next month, the
Hmm.
Winter Olympics. They don't want to harm their international stature
Hmm.
before that. But once the Olympics are done, and if this crisis continues up until then, uh, I could, I personally think that they could try some designs on one of the islands in the South China Sea. Now, Taiwan has a few small islands near China,
Hmm.
which comes under the air defense identification zone. And if you've seen, China has used its aircraft to go over the air defense identification zone of Taiwan and
Yeah.
provoke them.
Hmm.
So if this continues, I believe that at least some of the islands near in the South China Sea between China and Taiwan, I think China could very well at the least try and invade or do something over there,
Hmm.
because as they want to reunite it before within 100 years of the forming of the People's Republic of China, which
Hmm.
is 1949, so 2049.
Hmm.
But US intelligence and other intelligence services have said that they would try it before 2027.
Oh.
That is the 100 years of the formation of the People's Liberation Army.
Hmm.
So if they want to do it by 2027, taking those few islands would be necessary.
Hmm.
And I think if this crisis continues, they could very well go in for a move on that.
Understood. Understood. So that's also a situation that one needs to keep in mind, because otherwise the entire picture is now towards the focus of Russia Ukraine happening, right? Fair enough.
Yeah, so
So
I think sorry, just last
hmm,
statement. I think when we spoke about the geopolitical flashpoints, we looked at them in isolation earlier, but
exactly.
I don't think we can afford to do that anymore. I think we
Hmm.
have to look at them in concurrence,
Hmm.
and it one is immediately probably going to lead to a flashpoint in another one. So I don't think the planners, our security establishment, can look at what's happening in Kazakhstan
Hmm.
and not consider what might happen in the Taiwan state or even on the Himalayan border. Of
Hmm.
course, I'm sure if I am thinking about it, our security establishment is as well. But this is, something that we should not do. That we shouldn't look at it as, an isolated incident, and we should look at it as what's going
Chain
to
of
happen across the
events.
world.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
As a chain of events, and what unfolds
Yeah.
later on. Fair enough.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think that was it for the day, because if we anyways wanted this to be a sort of an update video from our last conversation, and not a full-fledged video as such for any topic. So I think I'd like to take this moment to thank you once again, Surya, for joining in for this
And
conversation.
that's no problem
and
on this.
and we
Always a
really
pleasure.
look forward to the next video, where we wish to go to the China Taiwan issue in depth, and then later on find out what are the trouble that is unfolding there and how it can affect us. Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Surya, once again, and I hope you have a great day ahead.
Thank you, Sandesh. You too.